Gamers, gals, non-binary pals, welcome to the new format, new ban list, new cards, new me. You gotta find a deck to take the locals to go 0-4, and I'm here to give it to you. We've got just about every single deck within the format, except for this one, and we're gonna try to tier them. We got tier 1, which is probably gonna be like the best or second best deck. You've got tier 1.5. These are decks that I think aren't like the best deck, but could very realistically win a YCS or do extremely well. Got tier 2, which is like, these are decks that are still good enough. They might be able to sneak into a top cut, and anything beyond this is, let's be real, it's not fucking real. So let's get into the first deck. We've got the Arrival Agnister Pile, and I think this deck sucks. I think that this deck is hot doo-doo. Like, you may be thinking, oh my god, I get to end on a big towers, very pog. You know what also ends on a towers? Pearly. If you want to tell me that just like summoning a towers and doing nothing is like a feasible game plan, sure bro, have at it. Unfortunately, there are just way too many outs to decks like this that exist within the format now. Stuff like Kurikara, stuff like Kaijus, stuff like Lava Golem, just a bunch of goofy stuff that people are playing for like Pearly and Unchained. We're also getting for, you know, the deck that loses to like a single Book of Moon. We've got Branded Despia, and I think that this deck is just barely okay. I don't think it's good. I think that Branded Despia definitely has huge issues regarding its consistency, as well as the amount of bricks and garnets that you're forced to play. Like, have you seen a Branded Despia list? They're playing like Gimmick Puppet, like one Quirartis, like one Ad Libitum, what, like just like one-ofs out the wazoo. Like, are you really trying to make the argument that like a deck that bricks like a third of its games is a good deck? Oh, by the way, if you get Ash Blossom a single time, you do explode. Like, again, at the end of the day, it's still like a branded deck, so if you do resolve a branded fusion, you are truly just the better player. But ultimately, I just don't think it's that good. I think it's so bad. Next up, we've got Naturia. I think that Naturia Runic is such a cringe fucking deck. I think that this deck is so obnoxious to play against. You have to play around the most stupid forms of interaction. You have to play around the most stupid forms of negation and resource looping. Like, it's just so obnoxious. I remember like one of the first locals I went to, like after coming back to TCG play, I played against 4 Runic Naturia players that day. It was actively like miserable. I fucking hated it. But with only one Sacred Tree, like this deck just doesn't have a real resource loop. This deck doesn't have a way to like generate resources turn after turn after turn after turn, which was like the only reason you played this deck. And yeah, unfortunately, this deck is just no longer playable. Now, we have a good deck. We have Branded Chimera, and this deck is pretty good. I think it's really, really strong. Funnily enough, it's a branded deck that doesn't lose to Ash Blossom, because you could just do like Chimera stuff and you could still technically end on like 1 or 2 negates plus like a hand loop. Like, the Chimera package is just so nice. It's just literally like an infinite loop of just summon a guy, summon Sword Knight, tag out Sword Knight into thing to add thing. Like, it's so fucking annoying. I hate it. It's so obnoxious, but it's really good. It's arguably gotten a little bit better just because of the fact that our Rise Heart doesn't exist within the format, as well as the fact that there's one less deck playing Dimensional Shifter, which this deck kind of struggled with. But I mean, like, what deck doesn't struggle with Dimensional Shifter? So I think that this deck is probably near the top of tier 1.5, and maybe the bottom of tier 1. I don't think it's actually tier 1, just because I think that the deck doesn't have that great of a power ceiling. I think that, like, it's a strong deck, like, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's, like, super duper strong in the sense where, like, the Kashira board was, like, fucking 9 Zone Lock plus a Rise Heart, or, like, 50 Omni Negates. I think it's more on the level of, like, Sword Soul, if you know what I mean. Now we have Rocket. Rocket lost 2 Chaos Space and 2 Magnemite. On the other hand, goodbye a Rise Heart, which was basically the only thing keeping this deck down. Like, again, one less deck that's playing Shifter. Pretty good for this deck, but I think that this deck does kind of struggle post-board in the sense where there are so many outs to the Dragon Link board. You know what I mean? Like Dark Ruler no more, Forbidden Droplet, Sphere Mode, Lava Golem, Kaiju. There are like enough outs to Dragon Link that I don't really like playing a deck that has, like, there are so many outs to the Dragon Link board as well as the Dragon Link setup combo, and again, stuff like Droll and Lockburn and Dimensional Shifter. I think that those cards just absolutely cook this deck alive, and I think that as a result, even though like Dragon Link did get a much better matchup spread within decks within the format, I think that its side deck hate just still kind of drags it down to tier 2 as much as I want to put in tier 1.5. Next, we got Drytron. Drytron's a really interesting deck. There's like one guy named Robert at our locals who just fucking cooks house with Drytron, dude. I have never seen this man ever like drop a set. It is like absurd. Whenever like I see him, like 80% of the time, he's playing Drytron into like Cash Tira and Dragon Link and like ending the set like 2-0. But unfortunately, not everyone is a Robert, and this deck is just not very good. You want to lose to Droll and Shifter? Like, be my fucking guest. You want to lose to Abyss Dweller? Be my fucking guest. You want to lose to like 50 forms of like side and main deck hate, similar to Dragon Link? Be my fucking guest. I want to put this in like tier like 3/rogue just because I'm biased, but like, let's be real. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves and try to make claims that are unfounded. Next, we got Altergeist. Altergeist is bad. If you're trying to tell me that Altergeist is a good deck in the year of our Lord and Savior 2023, if you want to tell me that ending on Silquidus plus maybe a Spell Trap Negate, I don't even fucking know what this deck does anymore. Combo Geist, all it does is just set up like annoying ass like Hextia. Like, sure man, you want to Hextia lock me in 2023 in a deck that literally does nothing else? Like, go for it, man. Like, I think that Altergeist just has so many fundamental issues. It is so interruptible. And it's just a deck from a just completely bygone era. I don't think it's just worth. I just don't think it's worth playing anymore. So I'm sorry, Doug, but this deck is hot cheeks. Speaking of decks that are hot cheeks, we got Eldritch. If you want to play Eldritch, why not just play Labyrinth? You don't have to fucking banish your traps in order to get your resources, except Big Welcome, but we don't talk about that. Everything that like Eldritch does, like Labyrinth just does better. It plays into floodgates better. It has like bigger bodies. It has more removal. It has more interruption. It has more resource looping. Like, the only thing Eldritch has for it is like Zombie World. Like, I think Eldritch is just not cooking. Next, we got Sky Striker. It's a bad deck. Sky Striker has like a lot of the tools back for it. Like, you've got a ton of blind second tools. You've got like runic cards. You've got advantage engines. Blah 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 blah. But the main problem is like Sky Striker. You're trying to play a deck from like 2018 in 2023. Like, trying to play a slow, methodical resource game of, you know, just like adding a bunch of cards and like searching like maybe like 3 cards a turn or type of deal. Unfortunately, that's just not a strong enough basis to build a deck around. Like, Striker's complete lack of like offensive potential and to do anything like proactive on its own outside of like, ah yes, I will draw a hand trap off of engage. Like, that's a relic of 2018, 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! That unfortunately does not translate into the current modern form of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where we have stuff like Cashier Birth, like every single turn is an infinite resource loop. You have stuff like Chimera Fusion, where every single card is a card that leads into another card, and you kind of have to stop it at all fronts. And like, unfortunately, Sky Striker just doesn't have the capabilities to like put up 5 fucking interrupts every single turn, you know what I mean? So unfortunately, Sky Striker is in the dope category. We got Math Mech. We have 1 circular. You really want to play Math Mech with 1 single circular? I don't think this is cooking. Like, the funny thing about Math Mech is like, the deck is so good at going second compared to like going first. Like, going second, making a 1 card access code after forcing out like your opponent's negates and interactions. Holy shit, that is the most obnoxious thing of all time. The fact you could just get access code wiped and like OTK'd. But like, going first, what do? Final Sigma plus like set super factorial? Yeah, and also the fact that you lose to Bestials. A single Bestial on the Sigma engrave, it's fucking game over, bro. Next we got Fulgo in regards to Runic, Spright, Fur Hire. It's a fine deck. I remember everyone in the last fucking comments and in the comment section being like, oh, Stevie, why didn't you put Spright down for the new format? It's Sprite's time to shine. Sprite's gonna be really good. It's because it fucking sucks. Okay? I'm gonna say it. Spright is not good. Spright is just not good enough anymore. It's too fragile. It's too interruptible. Everyone's playing fucking Book of Moon. I'm sorry. I'm just objectively correct when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh opinions. Like, the reality is, Spright just has too many bad matchups, and without stuff like Elf, it's just too interruptible. Like, you have no real follow-up or like backup play or any play that like insulates you. I'm sorry, I only speak facts. Next up, we got Salamangreat. I think that this deck is really, really funny, and that's because my friend Kevin plays it at locals, and every time I go against him, I fucking kick his teeth in because he's playing Salamangreat versus Labyrinth. But unfortunately, Salamangreat kind of falls into the same category as Math Mech, where it is so much more scary to go second versus it than going first, just because fucking access code, you know what I mean? Like the new Pyro Phoenix, as well as like Salamangreat of Fire, giving it like a new OTK line that doesn't require access code, I think that's cool. I just don't think it's good. Like, at the end of the day, you're just playing Salad with like an additional OTK line that can maybe search Rage like a little bit easier. I don't think that's enough to keep up in the current format of fucking, you know, Unchained. Next we got Dark World. This is a deck that fucking turbo loses to itself. If you want to play a deck that's unironically just raw gambling, you could play Dark World. Like, this deck is gambling harder than fucking Tiramit, dude. Like, the main problem with Dark World isn't like its ceiling or anything. Like, Dark World has always had like absurd crazy combos like Appaloosa, Nightmare Griffin, like Grapha Fusion, like 5 trillion other cards, and like getting hand looped for 20. But the reality is, in like 80% of your games, you're gonna open a hand of like 4 bricks plus like maybe 1 starter, and then you get like impermed or ashed a single time, and then you just like cry because like your deck sucks because you're playing Dark Worlds where like you're forced to play like 80 bricks just by nature of the deck. Next we got Draco Slayer. During Kashira format, this deck would be in the fucking don't category. Right now, I think it's marginally better. I don't think it's a great deck, again, because you lose to Droll, you lose to Ash, but I think with just a ton of Pendulum support just being released within the next couple months, as well as the fact that we no longer have to worry about like a Rise Heart or Shangira locking your zones, I think that Adagnister is barely good enough to be played. Like, again, it could probably sneak into like a top cut, but I just think that this deck still has too many fundamental issues just being a Pendulum deck to really see widespread success, in my personal opinion. Next up, we've got Infernoble. This might sound like an insane take. I think Infernoble's a tier 1 deck. I think Infernoble might be one of the best decks this format. Infernoble heavily reminds me of Kashtira, where it is a deck where if you do not open your out, you instantly lose. You will lose on the fucking spot if you do not get your Nibiru, you do not get your Shifter, which by the way, they can kind of play through Shifter, if you do not open like your triple hand trap, if they don't brick. Like, Infernoble, I think is such a strong fucking deck. It just does so much. You end on negates, you end on pops, you end on banishes, you end on like Barone. This is such a Infernoble is such a powerful deck, and I think it's like the most consistent combo deck within the entire format. So that should tell you where I'm putting the rest of the combo decks. You have to convince me how this deck isn't good outside of saying like, oh, it loses to Droll. Do you know what else loses to Droll? Like fucking 90% of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, okay man? And Droll Lockford is just a stupid ass card. And I think putting at tier 1 is perfectly fine. Next up, we got Kashira, and where this used to be tier 1, oh how the mighty have fallen. I think that Kashira is at best tier 3. Although the core of Kashira cards is still playable in the sense where you have like Unicorn and Fenrir and Burf and all that sort of stuff, you just don't really have a real end board to end on, you know what I'm saying? Like, as cool as ending on like Fenrir Unicorn Pass is, unfortunately is just not enough. Like, let's just be honest with ourselves. Like, summoning a bunch of big beaters with like pretty good effects is just not enough to get you there when you're looking at like Unchained, which sets up like 4 fucking pops plus 2 judgments. Like, oh my god, dude. Like, what are you supposed to do, bro? You're getting fucking cooked like an egg. Next up, we got Labyrinth. Now I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna be biased as fuck here. I'm gonna say it. I think that this deck is tier 1. Am I biased because I own this deck in full CR and max rarity with Starlights and CRs and common dimensional barriers for some reason? Yes. Am I biased because this is the only deck in the TCG which I own, which doesn't make me want to put a bullet in my head? Also yes. Am I also biased because this is like the only deck I can seem to win locals with? Also yes. But the actual answer is, Labyrinth is just a solid deck. It doesn't lose, it doesn't like auto lose to stuff like Duster, it doesn't auto lose to stuff like Evenly Matched. Like, it can be annoying as shit, but the resource loop that Labyrinth creates, as well as the form of disruption it has in being able to like reset trap cards from the grave, like D-Barrier, like Ice Dragon's Prison, or etc. As well as the fact that Labyrinth doesn't have a bad matchup outside of exactly like Dragon Link. Like, I think that's what makes Labyrinth extremely powerful. Like, some games of Labyrinth you are just gonna lose because you get like Twin Twister or Cosmic Cyclone or Evenly or Duster or Lightning Storm. But I think that that's an issue shared by like most decks, you know, just like losing to like certain blowout cards, like, you know, sometimes they just got it. I think that that's completely fine. And B, I think that Labyrinth also has a really good main deck game 1 matchup versus every single deck, because every single deck is maining stuff like Book of Moon or sort of cards to beat stuff like Unchained. And unfortunately, the cards that beat Unchained aren't actually that good versus Labyrinth. So I really, really like that. Except Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom's kind of annoying. So I think that putting Labyrinth tier 1, I think is pretty reasonable. Next we got Vanadium, and this is a combo deck that fucking sucks. I think Vanadium is a cool deck. I think Vanadium definitely has like the most power out of any combo deck, in the sense where you could just make a fucking hot red. But unfortunately, I think this deck is just so fucking bricky, dude. The amount of times where I've just been at locals and I've seen Vanadium players just be like, welp, I will summon a Barone and I will pass. It really does feel like half of Vanadium hands just end on like Barone Pass, which is like absurd for like how much investment you put into playing fucking Vanadium of all decks. Ooh, I gotta go like Meep, Pop, summon 2 Meeps, make an 8, make a 10, ooh, pass turn. As well as the fact that this deck just hard loses to like a lot of hand traps. Again, stuff like Ash Blossom, stuff like Droll. Like, I think Vanadium's just not cooking, unfortunately. I don't think it's gonna be the best combo deck. Maybe it might be like tier 2 alongside like Dragons, where maybe like 1 or 2 will slip into top cuts, but overall, Vanadium is just a little too inconsistent and a little too fragile. Speaking of consistency, we've got Marincess. Don't play this deck. Marincess kind of has the exact opposite issue of Vanadium, where it is extremely consistent, but its power ceiling is so fucking low. If all you're ending on are fucking hand traps and like a really shitty boss monster that doesn't really do anything, cool, man. I'm just gonna do my play. I'm just gonna vibe out. Like, in my opinion, in 2023, having hand traps should not be your win con. Like, a deck whose sole purpose is to like generate like a relatively weak or mid-range board and to just end on some hand traps, I don't think that is the sign of a good deck. That's why I don't think Striker is a good deck. That's why I don't think Salamangreat is a great deck. That's why I don't think Marincess is a good deck. Next, we got EXO Sister. Don't play this deck. I'm sorry. EXO Sister is just so bad. To give you an idea of why I think EXO Sister sucks, we had EXO Sister during Tier Limit format, and even during that format, people weren't even playing EXO Sister that much. I think EXO Sister had like 1 win total, and it was during a fucking remote duel YCS where the dude was playing like fucking Necro Valley and insane shit like that. Like, EXO Sister really is the deck where it's you either better hope you get matched against 4 Tier Limit players, or you better open D-Shifter, or you're fucking cooked, dude. And I don't think that's the sign of a good deck. I think it's just super duper mediocre. Next up, we got everybody's favorite deck. Every fucking little Yugi tuber's favorite shitty little deck, and that's Tiramit. Tiramit strongest. I might be a little biased, but I genuinely 100% believe that this deck is dog shit, bro. This deck is so fucking bad. You cannot convince me otherwise. You cannot convince me a deck that is forced to play fucking 50 one-ofs, as well as literally force you to gamble, is a good deck. I'm sorry. I just can't trust you. I think that like Tiramit, although like it's an extremely powerful deck still and still has like a bunch of goofy shit it could do, I just don't think it's consistent enough. Oh, by the way, if you Ash Blossom this deck a single time, you do win the game. We got Makonko. I'm sorry, Makonko's just bad. Like, what do you want me to say about Makonko? Ooh, it's an OTK deck. You know what also OTKs? Literally every single other deck. Unfortunately, like, we've progressed past the point where being a deck that can OTK easily is like a requirement or something that can stand out about a deck. Like, a single Branded Fusion is OTK. A single Quick Launch is OTK. A single fucking Chimera combo is OTK. Fucking Labyrinth can OTK, dude. This is why like decks like Red Maju and etc. fell off. Cards and archetypes have just evolved to the point where like OTKing is no longer like the bee's knees, you know what I'm saying? Next, we got Sword Soul. I think Sword Soul is pretty okay. I want to put this in tier 2, but in my heart of hearts, I know it's tier 3. Unfortunately, Sword Soul is just too okay. Just doesn't do enough. It's very interruptible. Its boards are like good, but they're not crazy. Like, it just doesn't have like a quote-unquote good matchup. Like, at best, Sword Soul, you're playing nothing but fair Yu-Gi-Oh! At worst, bro, you're losing because you got imprimed on fucking Taya, bro. Like, unfortunately, Sword Soul is just too fair of a deck right now. We need Protos back. That's the actual answer. Next up, we got Plunder. Don't play a deck that loses to a single Ash Blossom. Next, we got Pearly. I think Pearly is a really, really good deck. I think it's good enough to be in tier 1 actually. But I will say this. I think that Pearly is going to be the easiest deck to side for. There are too many outs to the Pearly board, and Pearly, unfortunately, is just kind of mediocre. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think Pearly is that good of a deck in the sense where, although I do think it has a really, really strong Unchained matchup, I think it's got great game going both first and second. Unfortunately, there are just so many cards that just invalidate Pearly, like Book of Eclipse, Book of Moon, Ash Blossom, Droll and Lockbird, Dimensional Shifter. Like, there are just so many ways to fuck with Pearly that really don't make me like putting it in like tier 1. So that's why I'm gonna put in tier 1.5. I think that Pearly, objectively, is a great deck. I think it's like, it should be in tier 1. But unfortunately, I think that just because it has way too many cards that you could side against it, that unfortunately there are just way too many cards that you could side against it, and you don't even end on like auto win boards with additional backup, in the sense where like Kashira, you could end on like a Rise Heart, sure, but you could also still have like a Fenrir and a Unicorn backup. So even if your opponent found a Book of Moon, it didn't automatically answer unless they drew like exactly like Book of Eclipse, but sure. Like I just think that Pearly is just not good enough. Next up, we got Vanquish Soul. I think that this deck is so cool for how bad it is, dude. I'm sorry, man. Vanquish Soul just doesn't do enough. Vanquish Soul is just so okay. Like again, it reminds me perfectly of Sword Soul, where it's an extremely fair deck, and at best you're going 50-50, and like again, it had like a really good Kashira matchup, but the reality of like Vanquish Soul is just like, I'm sorry bro, it just ain't enough. Next up, we got the Revo Sync. We're just gonna call this like the Synchro pile, where you're playing like Assault Synchron, and Revo Synchron, and like Junk Speeder, and like the Generator Synchro stuff. I think that this deck is super duper cool. I think that this deck is packing mad heat when it comes to combo potential. Unfortunately, also struggles from a little problem, which is called losing to every hand trap under the fucking sun. Remember when everyone said that Revolution Synchron was going to be a good card, and that it should be $60 fucking, and that it would change Yu-Gi-Oh forever because you could make Black Rose and ABC and like never lose a lap? It's fucking dog shit. Like this deck is bricky, this deck has horrible matchups going second. Like there's just nothing good about this deck. It's just so bad. Like if you want to lose to a single Droll and Lockbird playing a combo deck, just play Vanadium. At least Vanadium can like make Barone as well. Worst deck in the fucking format. Fluandereeze. This is like the perfect example of a tier 2 deck. Does it have a good Unchained matchup? Yes. Does it have good matchups versus some of the decks above it? Yes. Will it ever be a consistent topping deck? Absolutely fucking not. And that's for one reason only. That's because this deck is so fucking bricky. I have legitimately never seen a deck brick as hard as Fluandereeze. Like sometimes you will get lucky and you will just have the fucking tournament run of a lifetime and you fucking never brick. You always open like Rabina plus Field Spell plus Book of Moon, but Flu is just so inconsistent. Like the fact that you need to open some combination of like Eaglin plus another little bird, or like Rabina plus like Insulation in case you do get hand trapped. Like it's so bad. Like it's just so dangerous to play Flu and expect to do well. I think Flu is a good deck, like don't get me wrong, but I think that like the deck really does suffer from an issue of losing to itself. Next up, we got Runic Piles. I mean, Runic Stun is a funny deck. I don't think it's good. If you've seen the Vlad list, where it's just like Runic with like a bunch of fucking floodgates, fucking a mono Iwano, just disgusting garbage. Like, I love that shit. Feed me that fucking slop. However, I'm not gonna pretend like this deck is good. This deck is like horseshit. This deck is like objectively terrible. It's really funny though. Scare Claw. Let me get a shout out to 10, the fucking GOAT. But unfortunately, I do think that Scare Claw is kind of like Vanadium, in which where it's a really cool combo deck, it loses to a hand trap. Just hit this deck with a single Droll and Cockbird, and this dude will be in fucking chastity for the rest of existence. Unfortunately, it's just a combo deck that's just like an inferior version of like the decks above it. We've got Hero. Don't play Hero. That's my answer. We've got Rika Sun Avalon. I remember when I made my ban list wish list, and I said that Aromaseraphie Jasmine should be banned because that card does way too much on its own. And people called me transphobic because why are you targeting I'm not fucking targeting anyone. This deck is just fucking annoying. Like Rika Sun Avalon is such a weird deck in the sense where some hands are so fucking unplayable because they lose to a single Ash Blossom or Imperm, and some hands can play through like 5 interruptions, and that's primarily in part due to like Aromaseraphie Jasmine. I don't think we need to hit the Rika cards. I don't think we need to hit the Sun Avalon cards. What I do think we need to hit is the literal Summon Sorceress. I think that Aromaseraphie Jasmine is literally just Plant Summon Sorc, but somehow better. But enough about me complaining about that. Ultimately, I think that this deck is fine to play. Maybe it's even tier 2, but unfortunately, I think that in just more games than not, this deck just has bad matchups across the board. I think that Rika Sun Avalon is just a little too fragile. The reality is like this deck is just not going to do anything moving forward outside of like extremely sparse tournament results held up by exactly one person. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, is it the deck that's good or is it the player that's good? And I'd argue that the player is good, making a bad deck work. Next, we got Trap Tricks. If you want to end up in a watch list, it's tier 1. If you're not a pedophile, put this in the don't category. Now we have a racism. I think that race is pretty good. I think that it's a pretty important factor in Yu-Gi-Oh! What the fuck am I talking about? I think that it's a really, really solid deck, and its only bad matchup is like exactly Unchained. But I do think that Rescue Ace does remedy that really bad Unchained matchup with Puzzle Amino, the drop into leader, and being able to turn 2 of your guys into an Abyss Dweller as a sort of like, alright, this will technically get us there. Like, I think Rescue Ace just has good matchups across the board. It's a very, very powerful mid-range deck. The only thing I don't really like about it is that its going second kind of sucks. Like, Rescue Ace's entire purpose is to like summon a Turbulence, set 4, and pray to God that it gets you there. But unfortunately, that game plan does not really effectively translate into going second where you're trying to break apart a board. Like, your non-engine in Rescue Ace is so important. And I think that Rescue Ace just unfortunately has a really bad time going second, which is just like unlucky, bro. But going first, this deck is really, really nice. And obviously in games where you can side in way more non-engine, so you have a much easier time going second. And overall, I think that Rescue Ace is just an extremely solid deck. I'm gonna put it in tier 1. It's probably better than Labyrinth. Next up, we got the talk of the town, Unchained. I don't think I really need to explain why this deck is like tier 1. This deck is so unabashedly like the best deck in the room. I think it's arguably tied with Infernal, if not better. Like, I'm a little biased towards Infernal, but Unchained is just such a nice deck, dude. It's just so good, dude. Like, not only does Unchained have a really good going first and second, but additionally, Unchained doesn't have a card or cards that it hard loses to. Like, if you get ashed, it's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Like, you can still play. If you get like Drolled, sure, it's not the end of the world. If you get like Nibiru'd, it's not the end of the world. Like, there are ways of playing around all of these cards, or hands that just straight up beat those cards. And there are just, you know, straight up scenarios where like sometimes your cards are just not enough to break through an Unchained board that I believe that make Unchained just without a doubt the best deck. So I think Unchained is without a doubt the best deck in the format. Oh, by the way, let me get a shout out to Coder, who fucking thought that playing Tour Guide in Unchained would be bad, and that playing Blind Second with 3 of every twin would be a good idea. That should tell you, never trust a Yu-Gi-Tuber's opinions when it comes to fucking competitive Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially that guy. Next, you got Red Dragon Archfiend. Just play Vanadium. That's the answer. Finally, Aaron, my trusty mod slave who made this tier list, put Speedroid on here. Don't play this deck. Just play Vanadium if you want to play a combo deck. And that's the tier list. Here is the objectively correct tier list rankings for every single deck in the format. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And that's going to be it for this one. Goodbye.